They cried out for honor while silencing desire. In the cold lands of the north, where thunder was sacred and death a celebration, there was something that not even the gods could protect: love between equals. In the fog of the sagas, where everything seemed to be strength, glory, and sword, there was little room left for what could not be sung in heroic verse. But between the roar of battle and the howl of the winds, there were secrets that not even time could bury. Imagine a man of war, covered in blood and honor, feeling the weight of a gaze he could never return. The body of another, so similar to his own, became a temple and a curse. Between one invasion and another, in the silence of the tents, pulsed a desire that had no name, only guilt. Because in that iron world, anything that deviated from exalted virility was punished with scorn or silence, and silence was crueler than the sword. In Viking society, it wasn't enough to win. You had to appear invincible, even against your own feelings. There was an invisible code, sharper than any blade. Anyone who loved outside the norm would be reduced to shame. To be called ergi, passive, submissive, impure, was worse than death. It was an amputation of the soul, an exile within one's own body. And many, in order to survive, kept quiet about the truth until it made them sick inside.
But what happens when love becomes a threat to one's very existence? What is left of a man who has to kill parts of himself to be accepted among his own? The halls echoed with songs of glory, but in the eyes of some warriors there were ghosts, not of dead enemies, but of desires buried alive. This video is not about what the Vikings conquered, but about what they were forced to deny in order to keep the crown of manhood. It takes courage to look back and see what has been erased with shame, and even more so to recognize that the history we have been taught is full of gaps, shaped by centuries of fear, religion, and censorship. Homosexuality wasn't absent, it was silenced, and what has been silenced comes back. It comes back as a question, as pain, as a need for ancestral justice, and you may never see the Vikings in the same way again. If this story makes you curious in any way, enjoy this video, and comment below, "Not all love could wear a sword." This sentence isn't just a comment, it's an offering to the memory of someone who lived in the dark, and now he needs to be remembered.
The fires were going out, but the heat between two bodies still trembled like sin in the bones. In the dimness of the longhouses, when the gods slept and the men took off their helmets, secrets took shape. There were no words for it, only contained breaths, hands that hesitated, eyes that fled. Loving another man was like walking on thin ice. It might seem firm, but at any moment it would give way to the abyss. Viking society exalted the body as a weapon, a shield, a vehicle of honor. But the body that felt outside the rules was branded a failure. Anyone who desired without permission was pushed to the edges of the tribe like a tainted animal. To be Viking was to be feared, fertile, virile, and anything that threatened this image was burned, not on a pyre, but in silence. In the sagas, the heroes were made of stone and steel. They didn't cry, they didn't tremble, they didn't flinch in the face of the world. But those who loved in secret carried other burdens, not swords, but shame, not shields, but masks. The battle was internal, invisible, insane. You fought against yourself every sunrise.
Between warriors, touch was common, an embrace before death, a gesture of protection, one body on top of another on the battlefields. But there was an invisible line. If the touch was desire, it became offense. If affection was tenderness, it became weakness. And few dared to cross that line, because they knew, beyond it, there was no honor, only symbolic exile. Love between men was allowed if it tasted like domination, if it wore the language of war. The active was the hunter, the exacerbated masculine, the passive, the weak, the taken. And in this cruel game of mirrors, many learned to love by hiding inside roles forged with iron. Masculinity was a theater, and the price of freedom was never getting out of character. Those who were found out didn't die with a sword, but with scorn. They were called ergi, a word that bled like a curse. There was no trial, only exclusion, and exile in those lands of ice was almost always a death sentence, not because of the snow, but because of the loneliness that buried them deeper than any storm.
The faces that rest today under moss-covered hills may have smiled in secret, cried in silence. Their names have been lost because their loves could not be written down. History erased them with hands soiled with shame. But not all marks disappear. Some remain in the wind, the cold, the stone. And now that we're listening to these buried memories, it's as if the very ground is shaking beneath our feet, because when the truth returns, it doesn't ask permission. It invades like a storm from the north, shattering what was once certainty, and what remains is discomfort and reverence. The Viking gods didn't write their dogmas on stone tablets. Their teachings were whispered in thunder, wind, and heroic deaths. But it was man who decided that the body could only serve the fertility of the land or the violence of the battlefield. They invented boundaries where before there was only flow. They created boundaries between pleasure and shame, between strength and weakness, between the man who penetrates and the man who feels. And so, even the gods were used as a shield for human shadows.
In the language of the North, ergi was more than an insult. It was a symbolic death sentence, a label stuck to the skin, impossible to remove. It didn't just mean being passive in the carnal act, but being impure, being unworthy of lineage, being a traitor to virility. The insult became identity, and identity became a curse. Many lived with this burden attached to their souls, without ever having been touched. All it took was a rumor, an ambiguous gesture, a lack of children, and judgment fell like a hammer on living flesh. Viking masculinity was a demanding altar, and its most common sacrifice was the man himself who dared to feel. It wasn't just a question of punishing acts, but of controlling symbols. The body that bent, the gaze that lingered, the voice that softened. Everything was watched. Everything was a weapon against oneself. Sexuality ceased to be instinct and became a minefield. Every gesture had to be calculated. Every emotion had to be hidden. Freedom was a constant performance, and the soul a golden captivity. There were those who loved in silence, those who lay together like brothers, but cried like lovers, who slept under skins like allies in war, but woke up with their skin on fire from a restrained touch, who shared wine and wounds, but could never say, "I see you," because to say it was ruin. To say it was to sign one's own exile. Many became poets of themselves, writing songs they would never sing, dreaming of loves that would never exist outside the night.
There are no tombs dedicated to secret lovers, no monuments to passions suffocated in the confines of honor. But perhaps, among the stones of the old villages, there is still the echo of voices that were never heard. Every insult, every exclusion, every imposed silence was a way of erasing not only the person, but the possibility of a wider world. Viking homosexuality did not disappear. It was buried alive, under the snow of shame, under the skins of fear, under the chance of denial. Those who dared to love on that icy crossing loved like those who run away, like those who bleed without a wound. And this is the cruelest thing. Not only was the right to love taken away from them, the language to exist was taken away from them. No words, no name, no symbol, an existence amputated before they were even fully born. And yet they felt, they yearned, they looked at each other in the dark like someone trying to save a piece of themselves from drowning. And what are we today, digging up these fragments? Are we accomplices or heirs? Has the silence we inherited made us deaf, or has it made us responsible to listening to what no one wanted to say? There is a weight that falls on the living when the pain of the dead is ignored. And perhaps at this very moment, we are being called upon not just to remember, but to do justice by listening, by empathizing, by having the courage to see.
The love that was punished in the name of honor now resurfaces in the name of truth. And there is no sword sharp enough to cut through what has already been reborn within us. The certainty that each body that was condemned for loving carried within it a silenced God. They weren't destroyed in battle. They were destroyed from within. They didn't fall under enemy spears, but under the weight of their own existence. Those who carried the fire of forbidden desire died slowly, even if they were alive. Because what was forbidden was not touch, but being. And what cannot be lived rots in the soul like forgotten fruit. A man's soul splits in two when he has to deny what he feels. One half learns to obey, to put on the warrior's mask, to procreate, to shout alongside the others on the field of war. The other half hides. It buries its dreams, sews up its own mouth, lies down next to women with an absent heart. It lives not to die, but it doesn't live to exist. That was the tragedy of those who loved men in times of iron, to survive at the cost of disappearing from themselves.
On the longest night of the winter, one of them gets up and walks alone to the fjord. There, where the water touches the rocks, as if kissing an old wound, he cries. The cry has no sound, no name. It just drips like melted snow onto his skin. He remembers his childhood friend, his comrade in arms, his brother with his secret laugh, who is now marrying a woman and sealing the grave of what they were forever. He screams inside, but no one hears, because the scream of forbidden love doesn't hurt the air. It only hurts the chest. How many men have loved in silence and died whole inside? How many have used marriage as armor, children as proof of normality, rude gestures as a disguise for their fear of self? And what happens to a people who force their members to kill what is most alive in them? Perhaps that's why the winds from the north sound so sad. They unknowingly carry the unspoken regrets of a broken lineage. The runes speak of battles, alliances, and honorable deaths, but no rune tells the story of a hidden kiss, of a furtive touch between two warriors, of a farewell in which one of them died inside. The songs fell silent where love didn't fit. And even today, when visiting Viking ruins, the silence weighs more than the stone. Because where there is no name, there is no mourning. And where there is no mourning, trauma remains as a curse.
These men weren't looking for scandal or defiance. They just wanted to exist, to love, to touch, to feel. But they were forced to choose between symbolic death or self-denial. And many preferred a slow, daily, invisible death. They died inside empty marriages, buried their feelings in inner tombs, carried empty gazes until their last breath. They were heroes in public and ghosts in solitude.
Sometimes the real tragedy is not to die early, but to live without ever having been. And among the Vikings, those who loved outside the norm had no right to failure. They were condemned to be flawless or invisible. And the world forgot about them, like someone who blows out a candle before dawn, for fear that the light will reveal too much.
Now, when we look back, we don't just see warriors, we also see broken men, contained gazes, lives hidden under cloaks of glory. And maybe the greatest enemy wasn't the foreigner. Perhaps the greatest enemy was the silence that corrupts from within.
Under the sodden earth of the north lie the bones of warriors and farmers, kings and servants, wives and children. But there are also secrets, like blades wrapped in moss. Time has swept away their stories with the same coldness with which winters clear forest trails. No parchment has kept their names, no rite recognized them. They were loves that could not flourish, and for that very reason, they left twisted and silent roots under the ground. In Viking society, love between men could only be experienced as a metaphor, a reverie, a shadow. Anything that was too human but didn't serve the glory of the clan was erased. Being sensitive was a risk. Being vulnerable was a crime. To feel, without the frame of power, was to open one's chest to the arrow of exclusion. And the cruelest thing was that the lovers themselves bore the guilt, as if their love was a disease, a deviation, a fault of the gods. But no feeling is a flaw. The fault lay with society, which fashioned false mirrors, handed each man a mask, and demanded that he never take it off. Viking masks were made of stone and sweat, and the heavier the mask, the lighter the lie seemed, until one day the truth fell completely silent. There were no more voices, no more wailing, just silence. The silence of successful denial, the peace of the lie perfectly in place.
And that silence has reached us. It's in the gaps in official histories, in the images of warriors who never cry, in genealogies that ignore desire. It's in the movies, the songs, the statues. Absence speaks louder than presence. Absence shapes the way we look at the past, the present, and even what we think is possible in the future. And when an entire nation forgets those they loved in another way, it also condemns those who are to come. But stories thirst for return, and even what was buried in hurry one day springs up. Today, these forgotten narratives return like hungry specters, demanding space, demanding a voice. Not to undo the past, but to sew together what has been torn, to restore humanity to what has been dehumanized, to give a name to what has lived without a name. It's not a question of correcting history, but of illuminating it with the light it itself has rejected. And if we listen carefully, perhaps we can still hear it, not shouts, not complaints, but ancient whispers coming from the stones, the waters, the bones. Whispers that say, I existed. And that's enough, because to recognize is to resurrect. And by giving space to these stories, we're not just telling the past, we're allowing it to tell us too, to reveal to us what we try to ignore, that love is older than honor, wilder than war, more persistent than oblivion.
The history of homosexuality among the Vikings is an open wound in time, a wound that bleeds not only for those who lived, but for those who never could. And in looking at this wound, we shouldn't offer judgment, but listening. Silence, yes, but now a silence of reverence, not repression. Because finally, what has been silenced is being heard. And that is stronger than any sword, more enduring than any empire. Because when a buried love comes back to the surface, it comes back as a root. And roots don't ask permission, they just grow. They tried to bury love as if it were a mistake, but they forgot that ice doesn't swallow everything. There are things that just lie dormant under the surface, waiting for the right time to sprout. And now, centuries later, the broken roots are starting to move under the frozen earth. They're not ghosts, they're seeds that refuse to die.
Untold stories don't disappear.
They pile up like snow on the roofs of old houses, weighing them down little by little until something gives way. And when it does, it's not ruin, it's revelation. The pain of these forgotten men was not in vain. It became a crack in the ice. And through that crack, light now comes through. A timid but insistent light. A light that burns where before there was only darkness. Imagine a rock in the middle of the tundra, alone, motionless, forgotten. From the outside, it looks dead. But one day, a small flower breaks through the snow and grows there in the crevice of the rock. This flower doesn't change the past, but it challenges the present. It says, without saying it, love lives. And living is, in itself, an act of resistance. That flower doesn't ask for permission, it just insists. So too are the memories we recognize today. Small, delicate, but indestructible. They carry the weight of what was denied, the blood of what was silenced, the strength of those who loved despite the cold. Each story rescued is like a flower among stones, proof that even in the most hostile soil, the human soul finds a way to breathe.
There are no statues for these men, nor epitaphs, but there is something more eternal than bronze, living memory, silent recognition, the ability to feel for them what they could not experience for themselves. When you hear this story, when you feel that sweet nagging in the bottom of your chest, something opens up, and maybe, for a moment, you too will bloom among the stones. This video wasn't made to teach, but to remind, to give skin back to those who have been turned to stone, to say that no one should disappear for loving. And if you've made it this far, maybe something in you has been touched too. Perhaps you too know the weight of a hidden love, of a part of you that had to be silenced in order to survive. So let this story not die again. May it travel. May it find other silences and turn them into listening. Subscribe to this channel to continue unearthing forgotten truths. Comment below, what did this story awaken in you? Your experience is part of the cure. And share this video with someone who needs reminding that even in the most brutal cold, love insists on being born.
Be it the crack in the ice, be it the flower between the stones, because every gesture of memory is also a gesture of justice. And may it echo in you, even after the silence. What was silenced still pulses.